Welcome everybody here to the Martin Segal Theater Center at the Garde Center, CUNY. My name is Frank Henschke and I'm the director of programs. We bridge academia and professional theater, international and American theater, but we are very deeply also embedded in the New York theater community. I don't know how much of you know about the Prelude Festival. We're doing it for over 20 years, where we invite artists and ensemble to show work in progress, and we host many discussions about space, discussions about theater criticism, discussions about funding models, and we all realize what a complicated time we live in. Corona has done tremendous damage around the world, but the hardest, of course, are artists, but of the artists, I think the theater artists, of course, are the ones facing real complications. Funding is down, big foundations take away their funding. It goes to, for maybe good reasons, to social causes, community, and there is a sense of doom. Audiences are down. They were down sometimes 50% a year ago. A lot of New York organizations say we just produce two plays instead of 4 or 5, and we triple our ticket prices. We think it's terribly wrong. And there is a sense as if New York theater is a little bit on the way down. It's not working. But New York theater is alive and it's kicking. If we remember the 70s, when there was the drop-dead discussions about New York City, where the artists who did the work, who were innovative, actually stayed and helped to make the city who it is now, and a debt that perhaps hasn't really been paid. Hilary Miller wrote a great book about it. And so our contribution now is to really show and investigate what is happening. And there's a lot of good things happening. A lot of stuff gets produced. There are young producers. There are people who reinvent the world and do things different anyway, and then the old models who potentially didn't really work. So today is a look at how this landscape looks like, how it has changed, and what we can learn from it. So topics are about outreach, PR, budget, what I should have known before I produced my first play. How can we find new models, what works and what not. So it's a fantastic day, I think, and I would like to thank you all for coming out on an afternoon, on a beautiful one, I think. I haven't been out since this morning, but it means a lot to us. I also would like to welcome our viewers on HowlRound, and Vijay and Thea for making this possible. We have viewers from around the world, but so a lot of people are watching now and you say, what's happening in New York theater? And they actually come often to our programs. So now it's my really great honor to introduce Emily and Blake, two great workers in the landscape of New York theater. Before I do, take out your phone and see if it says ring, or what does it say? Silent. It should say silent. Take a moment. And we come to what we would call, it's PR and marketing. I think it's too harsh a term. I think great supporters of theaters are people who run agencies that support artists, get the work out. They are the ones who understand, also make choices, how things are communicated. And they also know the market, almost like bond traders, I think, who are on the floor, immediately see, and also over a larger landscape. So today we have both of you here, so really, really thank you for coming. Blake also has supported us with Prelude before, and also Emily knows about our work. So I'm going to give you the mics, and you have to speak into it since it's recorded. And again, thank you for everyone. Just so if you raise your arm, who is producing work? Can you raise? Who is a director? Who is producer? Yeah, and they're all based in New York, I assume. Hey, good to see you. So let's start. What has changed? What's new?
I think, you know, the death of print media has been talked about for like the last 20 years. And everything's been going online. You know, we lost the Village Voice. The Times posts a lot of things online that they don't post in the print edition. American Theater Magazine was online only for a while, and now they're back in print, but not every month the way they were. So I think, you know, that's certainly a difference, and we're seeing that editors are very concerned with clicks and how many views are an article or a review getting, and that's informing their choices in terms of what they decide to cover.
Yeah, and I think what I would add to that, I find that in a way that's often stressful, even though we know it to be true, it remains stressful. What I would add to that is just that it seems like to get the coverage to happen, I rep some independent producers doing an individual production, but mostly represent institutions on year-round contracts that produce theater or performance art, dance, or something else. And I find that most of the coverage that used to happen as a given for certain things always needs for us to talk someone into it. If not always, then most of the time. So like an argument needs to be made for why this production or this artist or this subject matter at this time.
Hold a bit closer, yeah.
Sorry. So yeah, I mean, I think that means that the work at this point needs to be very bespoke and sort of done by hand in a certain way, but I also think that that's an opportunity to independent producers because, you're sort of, by definition, I think, making these things happen with your own hands. And I feel like the landscape of press that we're in right now is one that, in a way, lends itself to that.
I would say that I'm mostly, maybe 85% of my clients are self-producing artists or independent theater companies. So we've always had to be innovative in terms of how we're pitching the press, how we're securing that coverage. So I think that hasn't changed for me. It's always going to be sort of a Hail Mary to get the New York Times to cover the type of clients that I rep. And I think, just being innovative and really thinking outside the box and even thinking outside of, like I read an article in the Times that like TikTok theater influencers are becoming a big thing for Broadway shows. And I think I haven't seen a lot of off-Broadway or off-Broadway people tapping into that. And I think that's a way to get the word out. That's a way to sell tickets.
I think that's very true. Yeah, I find that too. And I would just say the institutions that I do represent, none of them are Broadway, so it's like it's always us against the sort of truly commercial things that the tendency is going to be to give the coverage to, because there is the sort of knowledge that tourists will come here and take in the shows and things like that. So, but some of the things that I find I try to do, I would just sort of mention a couple of them to you, because I think I truly believe that a lot of the work that I am an expert in and Emily is an expert in, anyone could be doing with a little bit of know-how, particularly in the world we live in where most journalists' contact information can be found online. So, you sort of might, depending on what the project is, be able to figure out on your own who it would be helpful to have writing or broadcasting about the project that you're doing. And then just certain things that I almost always do is, one, I tend to start an email in a way that's personalized when I write to this person. So you might say, I just read the article you wrote about so-and-so's show that's happening. I'm producing one that has an artist in common with that one, or a topic in common with that one, and I thought you might be interested in this. Another thing, just to mention one, and I'll not give you an exhaustive list, is I tend to put the name of the journalist I'm writing to in the subject line just so that they know that it is, I hope that they read it this way, but that it is a message you're sending just to them. It's not a sort of spam email that has gone out to 700 journalists through a database.
Yeah, I think speaking to being able to do PR for yourself, if you can't afford a publicist like me or Blake, is that there's a lot of things you can do on your own. You can submit a Broadway World post yourself. You can submit a lot of event listings yourself. And I think, as Blake was saying, it's easy to find a lot of journalist contact info. Even as a professional, I'm constantly sliding into DMs on Twitter or Instagram of journalists that I want to have a relationship with. And as a self-producing artist, you can absolutely do that as well. I think the key is just to have a really strong why for the journalists that you're reaching out to. Why should this be interesting to them? How, you're helping them by offering them something they're going to want to cover, something they're going to run a review, something they're going to want to write a story about. And I think going to them with your hands full with something that they're going to be interested in is really the key.
When should you start thinking about this? The show starts, let's say, June 1st.
I would say anything less than 6 weeks out is going to be difficult. I would say 8 to 10 weeks out is sort of the sweet spot. If you can start thinking about it 3 months out, that's ideal, especially if you're talking about hiring an outside press rep. 3 months out is really ideal.
I would give the exact same answer. I was thinking in different units of time. I was thinking months, not weeks, but I'd say 2 to 3 months.
And if someone approaches you, need a good photo, or you write this, they write the description. How does it work?
Yeah, so when I work with a client, I handle everything to do with the press outreach. So drafting the press release, sending it out, pitching features and interviews, submitting listings, securing the reviews, and then giving press kits to the press that attend. And that's usually photos, script,
Scripts,
program. Yeah. Critics love having the script to reference as they're writing the review, so that's good to have. And I think, there's always meetings and back and forth trying to figure out the exact language to talk about the piece. I always like to read the script before I work on a project, so I know what I'm talking about. I know what the work is. And I always sort of work hand in hand with the producer trying to figure out the best marketing language that puts our best foot forward in terms of promoting the show.
Yeah, I mean, I find that if you're the producer and you're hiring a PR person, I think a lot of our peers would not just hope but expect or need for you to give them the bios of the artists involved, the description of the work, all of that. I actually think that, in a way that's maybe obvious, that it tends to be more successful when the writing is being done sort of for that purpose. Like, I think it's important that whoever is reaching out to journalists have, as Emily is describing, a sort of deep knowledge of the work, and not, because I just think to get out the basic information, unless that basic information is a real argument for the relevance of the work at this time, it's going to need something more sort of tailored to the moment that the work is being produced in, I would say.
Is there something you remember, something, this worked well, we got this and that, or someone gave you material you could work very well with?
I think having press photos is huge.
How many?
I mean, I would say like 6 is a good number, but like for an example, I worked on a festival called the Comic Book Theater Festival, and they had amazing like press photos for this one show, like ray guns and like superhero costumes, and we got in the front page of Time Out New York with that. So having photos, having images, even having video or B-roll of the show, super, super helpful.
I think that's very true. Video is even better than having still photos if you have them. It's not that there isn't an answer. I just want to give you a really good answer to this question of something that worked well. But this is not an answer to the question. But one thing that I just feel inclined to add is that I think like it's okay to be independent and sort of, I forget who is David and who is Goliath in that sort of duality. But I think sort of like just humbly being aware of how independent and on its own resources a project is can actually work in your favor. And I would even go so far as to say that a lot of the journalists or critics that you would want to pay attention to the work, I caution my clients sometimes, they are not our collaborators. Yes, we are in this community of theater making and getting it out to the world and all of that together, but I think it's going too far to say, hey, we're partners in this, don't you know we need help selling tickets, etc. I don't think people in the press quite want to hear that or feel that it's appropriate for us to be that in cahoots with them. But I also do think that the decline of the sort of media industry and the way that that negatively impacts our entire field is something that they do care about. And so I think to reach out to them, give them an opportunity to come check out the work, that it is personalized to them. I do think that most of those people, your Helen Shaws and your Laura Collins Hugheses, I don't know which journalists you follow or would care about, but I think these people do have a real, genuine human concern in the well-being of this work. And so I just think where you're coming from is something likely to be sympathetic to them.
And I think something producers can do to sort of help journalists and make them more willing to cover your next show is actually share the reviews. Credit the critic, post it online. I've had editors tell me, we did this in-depth story and nobody from the theater company shared it. So I think that's important, is don't just expect, that you can get views on it without actually sharing it. If you get a good review, post those pull quotes on your Instagram account. If you get a really great in-depth story, put it in your next email blast. Utilize the press that you get.
Yeah, so if I understand right, they might not like your story, your play, or whatever, but if you have a great photo, this will get your chances really up. Make it personal. Really tell it on an honest way. There might be bigger sympathy to a small, great production than to a $1.5 million production that comes to a very big house and people know it's not going to be from word of mouth anyway. It was so great. And then sharing, also following the work of the people you write about theater, and really see who likes your work. It's like writing to a restaurant critic who just reviews meat producing restaurants, but you have a vegetarian product. So you really have to know also who you reach out. A question to you guys: what do you detect in the New York theater scene changes compared to the years before COVID or now? What do you observe?
I feel like the New York theater scene is back and kind of bigger than ever. I feel like there's more new theater companies coming out like every day. I feel like there's young people producing. I feel like there's new playwrights that I haven't heard of that I'm excited about. I feel really optimistic and positive about where the theater scene is headed.
Yeah, one thing that would on face, or in one way of looking at it might just seem like the disappearance of something that used to be there and available to us. But there is a lot of, and I say this as a person repping institutions that were fortunate to enjoy this coverage almost automatically a lot of the time in the past. And the coverage being, we have a new artistic director, we have a departing artistic director, we're announcing a new season. A lot of these things would get covered as a matter of course and don't anymore. I think part of the reason they don't is that there is an effort, and it has to do with the pandemic, but also things that happened simultaneous with the pandemic, like the We See You White American Theater movement, et cetera, where the stopping doing things that we used to do automatically is also meant to make space for doing it with others who weren't inside the gate up to this point. So I think that can be a real advantage of something that has happened over the time since the shutdown for the pandemic.
And how was your work? Do you get more requests than before? Did it stay the same? How?
In terms of during the pandemic versus now?
Now, or the year, or compared to last year, all of it, yeah.
During the pandemic, I did a lot of online theater and streaming theater. And it was interesting to see how sort of innovative people could be with Zoom theater. I'm very glad that live theater is back, and I really feel like, it's busier than ever. There's just so much happening, and I think everybody's happy to be back in the theater and back experiencing live performance together.
I think that's very true.
Yeah, so it's good to know that you say there is TikTok, as you say, is out there. I think perhaps that's more in the advantage for small companies than for the Disneys of this world. As you pointed out, the real estate on the big papers, New York Times, shrank. The number of performances that have to be played, how much is it now, 12 to be reviewed?
21.
21. So even to get a review in the Times, you need to do 21 performances, which, puts out already a large amount of people. Nothing with education. Often the ones you have here, university is also out. The Village Voice doesn't really exist anymore. Time Out New York does not cover as much. By the way, we are trying to create a Segal site where we list also theater events. I hope this will come out soon. But there need to be new ways to reach out, and I think the invention of that digital media, the TikTok work, which will only be growing anywhere with everything, so is something we have to look forward to. We have about 7-8 more minutes, and one of the great things in the Segal Theater is we have great participants, also have always great audiences like you have also. Let's spend the last 10 minutes on this. Cooper, if you can put up some light to the audience, and I will come with a mic. Anybody has a thought, a comment, suggestion, or a question? Yeah, so 1, 2.
Hi, I just have a question on your comment about TikTok. I'm not a TikTok user, and my impression is it's just for very young people. And I'm just wondering, do you know anything about, what can you say about the demographics of TikTok? Who's using it? Who would we be reaching if we used it?
Yeah, I would say TikTok is definitely a Gen Z outlet, but there are a lot of theater influencers that post on TikTok and post on Instagram, and I think it's sort of an untapped market that indie theater hasn't really reached out to yet. And I hear producers say all the time, you know, we want younger audiences, That's where they're at.
So who was? Oh, here.
This is wonderful, and everything you've said is so helpful and specific. But one of the last things you said is a little alarming. As an independent producer and playwright, the usual route for low-budget productions is equity showcase productions, and they do not allow more than 16 performances. Does that mean they will never be reviewed? You said 21 is required in order to be covered.
So from conversations I've had with folks at the New York Times, they're kind of changing how they cover showcase productions. I don't think it's a never, it's just a not as much as we have been. I think 21 performances doesn't guarantee you coverage, but it does give you a better chance at it. But I think it's always been this way for indie and off getting covered. And you really just have to think outside the box and think of, you know, what sets your show or your company apart, and really, you know, hit those angles with them.
Oh, sorry, Frank.
No, go ahead.
I'm like, am I just going to talk really fast? I'll try to be more efficient than I usually am when I'm talking. But there's a thing that a person in my life who has to do a lot of fundraising said to me once, which is this rule of thumb, which is if you want money, ask for advice. If you want advice, ask for money. And I just think there's something especially now there's something really especially now to the idea of reaching out and saying, I think you might be interested in this, but not saying, coming and reviewing it for the New York Times, because I think they know that the sort of criteria for qualifying that the bar is getting higher and higher all the time. So they might say, oh, there's just no way. It's 5 performances out at the Irondale Center in Brooklyn. But if you just get them there and they fall in love with it, then there's all kinds of ways that they could cover it, whether it's a critic's notebook about shows that require endurance, or it's a feature story that's more a human interest story about the person who made the show. So I just think there's real value in inviting people without completing the sentence and saying, and doing this.
Going back to TikTok, what kinds of material, what kinds of stuff do you imagine being put on TikTok? Do you see, you know, a short piece of the production? Do you see the director/producer talking directly to camera? Do you have any thoughts about?
Yeah, I mean, I think TikTok is sort of a similar medium as Instagram. So anything that you've been posting on your Instagram stories can also be posted on TikTok. It's a video-based medium. So obviously it would be, you know, rehearsal footage or behind-the-scenes stuff or interview stuff. But the same stuff you're putting on your Instagram stories, you can be putting on a TikTok.
This is the row, apparently. I don't know if our friend Sonia is going to cover this in budgeting, but could you give us a rough estimate about what would be involved with hiring an independent marketing firm to take on a project, just to give us a range so we have a sense? Thanks.
Okay, I keep looking at you. I'm not looking at you like, please answer this question, but do you want to answer this question? I don't want to answer this question.
Sure,
but I
I'm
will.
happy.
Just
I'm
a
happy
range,
to
a
take it.
general range from what you know. Yeah.
I would say it obviously depends on the publicist. Everybody has sort of a different range, but I would say 2 to 4K is probably pretty common.
For a production? Yeah, I've been more around 6 recently.
I would say for an independent.
Yes.
Yeah, and there's also real work involved, and that's why someone can send out for $500 an e-blast, but it won't do anything for you. And then
Hi, this is great. Wondering if you could just kind of tell what is the thing to look out for people like yourself, PR marketing people. What's the checklist that somebody like myself would want to consider to hire you?
I mean, I would make sure they've actually read the script, that they actually are connecting to the work in some way. I would make sure that you're working with somebody where you kind of fit in with their other clients. Like if you're doing a kitchen sink drama, but they mostly rep dance, they're probably not the right fit for you. And I would say steer clear of anybody who promises anything, because publicists we can't promise anything. So if you have somebody who's promising you, oh yeah, I'll get you in the New York Times, that might be a red flag.
I would just, I love this question, actually. And one thing that I would say for myself, I try not to take on a project. It's like you're acknowledging this is real work. $4,000, $6,000 is real money, And if I'm honest, what keeps me up at night is worrying about whether the listing in Time Out New York, the Broadway World News piece, and having tried to get something at the New York Times is really worth your $4,000. And I think in many cases it's not going to be. And in addition to being wary of anybody who promises things, I think most publicists will say, we're going to send this to 300 people, including the New York Times. But I think it's really important to drill down and say, okay, but how likely do you think it is that you can get some of these things, and which ones? So while a person can't guarantee it because you're not buying an ad, we're trying to persuade someone to review the show, let's say. I think it is important to try to get someone to give you an honest assessment of how likely they are to succeed at these things, so that you can decide whether it's worth the money.
Hi, I'm an independent producer and director, and the 2 shows that we just actually produced, we had a social media expert on it who only did social media and went and saw the metrics of all the sites that we're on, and that was incredibly helpful. Would you recommend that for every show you do? Or, for the shows that we were doing, it really helped. Is that something that is becoming more of a practice, where you're splitting between social media and folks like yourself who are more traditional?
I've definitely worked on shows that had social media marketing people attached to them. I actually just worked on a show at Theater Lab that worked with an influencer person who specifically was reaching out to Instagram and TikTok influencers, which is, I think, why it was first on my mind. I think most people probably don't have the budget for that, but I think if you have the budget for a specific marketing person that's going to help with advertising, that's going to help with social media, that's super helpful if you can afford to do it.
Last question, then we have to move on.
Hi, I was just wondering about for social media, do you find that if you put time and money into doing some of these like trend memes, as opposed to not just doing behind the scenes, so like say you're going to do the boomers saying Gen Z, trend, slang and things like that, do you find that there's really return on that, or is it just kind of maybe you get a lot of views, but it doesn't actually correspond to ticket sales or not?
I'm looking at Emily on this one because I'm not sure if I feel expert enough to answer the question. Sorry, I keep giving answers to adjacent questions and not the question being asked. What the heck? I'll say it. I don't know. I'm finding that like it's hard to rely on press, traditional media to sell tickets for things these days. I don't think I realized this until just now, but it's almost getting to be where I feel like traditional media is best, what it best serves is fundraising, and social media is the best thing for ticket sales.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Wow, I think we have to, well, quick.
Yucks.
On the topic of TikTok, I just wanted to say that I drove 9 hours to see a Dracula ballet specifically because I saw it on TikTok.
Okay, but this is quite something that the print media and the digital media was good for. So a big round of applause. Thank you for joining us. And I hope you will be back. And and I know especially you, both of you, how much you put also in the productions you stand for as a representative. So we have our real respect for you. So now we move over to budgeting, and you can. You're relieved. You can go. So thank you again. And now we have Sonia Clark with us, and Sonia will talk about budgets. Which is, of course, a complicated question. It's like saying, can you tell me how much it costs to build a building, and whether it's a garden house or a palazzo, or a library, or the Pentagon? But still, I think we should try to do it. I give you this.
Hello.
Sonia, maybe say a word about yourself.
That's hard because I started my career as a finance associate and then senior accountant at New York City Opera, and that was in the 90s. And before that, I studied international banking operations in Soviet Union in Moscow. After City Opera, I actually left for a small theater, Urban Stages, where I was managing director in New York City. So I ran that for 9 years. So we did productions on a very different scale, a lot of showcases, a lot of mini contracts, tier 1. We were at one point. After that, I went back to Columbia University and got an MFA in producing, where we focused on producing commercial Broadway theater type structures. I did end up producing an international show with Stage Entertainment. It was a transfer from London to Paris and then to Moscow, Zorro, with Chris Renshaw was the director and Rafael Amargo was the choreographer. We had 7 languages in that show. Then I toured with Meredith Monk and the House Foundation. And most recently, I ran for 9 years a large performing arts center in a public park, art park. It's a large institution with relatively, with a $9 million budget, $8 million budget, and many different programs, and a large stage, a lot of it outdoors. So full disclosure, I have not produced a show in New York City for about 9 years.
But
So,
still, you know a little bit about budget. So first question, why is a budget important?
Maybe you can tell me. Budget is a plan, right? And everybody has a plan, and plans can take all kinds of variety. It's very important to approach a budget as your own plan in a very specific way. Yes, there are boilerplates. Yes, there are models. But ultimately, your show is your show. And you look at the budget as kind of a roadmap of all the things, all your aspirations with that show through numbers. And how you're going to get to those objectives shown in numbers, especially. We don't have it up. I asked to just put it like a very, very super basic budget boilerplate for those who had never done a budget before. Frank asked me. It's going to look very funny to some of you who have a ton of experience. But it starts there. Maybe not.
We will see. As a question, what are the mistakes people do when it comes to budget before they even start? What do you think?
Well, what are the mistakes? Sometimes we get too excited and too too unrealistic about expected goals. We love our play, we love our show and our project, so we over-project the revenues. That's probably the biggest issue, and so budgets have two sides to it, revenues and expenses, right? And revenues also can come from various sources. In a nonprofit, it can be both contributed revenues and earned revenues. In a commercial production, it's obviously tickets, but also concessions, also all kinds of other secondary revenue streams, whatever your imagination can provide as a producer. So on the revenue side, it's usually that, or not seeing potential additional revenue streams. A lot of us, focus on the show and selling the tickets. We don't focus on the merchandise. We don't focus on the concessions. Larger shows that get to run longer, they make very substantial revenues on such things. At Art Park, we made 24% of our revenue, earned revenue, came from beer. Beer. I'm very good at selling beer. So just really using your imagination, all the possible ways in which you can draw the revenue is very useful. How you look at sponsorship is another subject. On the expense side is underestimating or not really realizing all the things you may have to actually pay for, like meals, pizza, or overtime for your musicians. That may or may not be expected. Overtime for your crew. Local transportation, taxis, all those kind of things that are not on the front of our mind when we plan something. So really scrutinizing your plan to that level of detail is very important. And another huge thing also is once you build the plan is the follow-through, is the monitor of your plan as you go along. In a commercial production, you first have to capitalize your show. So you have to first build all of the expenses and raise all the money you need to actually open the show. So all the way through your last preview is your capital budget, your capitalization budget. And then you have your running budget. You open the show, and then the ticket starts coming in. You have to book the revenues properly in your accounting system, account for taxes in the proper way. So those are all the various things that in a commercial production get complicated. In a touring production, there's a whole other side to it, is the things like freight. How many trucks are you going to need to ship this production from one venue to another? How do you plan your truck? It's a whole ballet operation. And again, that goes into your plan. You plan that out. How many trucks am I going to need? Or how many trucks would make sense for me to have? So let's backtrack and rebuild the set in such a way. What other? So you project out and keeping track of your cash. You can have the most expensive car, a Lamborghini, but you can get stuck in the middle of that highway to the Hamptons without gas. Very important to keep a regular track of your cash. So once you build your first plan, you build out a projection, and building the projection in regular time periods, weekly, monthly, however, whatever makes sense for your organization or for your project, and follow through and look back. So at the end of every week, check back. Did this actually happen? Am I actually where I thought I was going to be? So this thing that this is an example of an organizational, like a large-scale nonprofit company budget. If you scroll to the very bottom, that's kind of what I wanted to show. Can you get to the bottom of it? Go, 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 go. So all these things. See, this is my usual spreadsheet. This is me running a company every day, and these numbers get updated very regularly, all of them, and they're all connected. So when you get to the very bottom, oh, Jesus. Right. There you go. Cash. Beginning cash, ending cash. So all these activities above, you start with this amount, you end with that amount by the end of October. In November, that changes. So you always want to make sure you have enough money in the bank as things progress. As you're capitalizing the show, if it's commercial or if it's already running. Every week, your ticket sales are telling you, or you also can project them out. Project them 12 months ahead. Project them 6 months ahead. Whatever makes sense, but having that kind of handle on what's coming in the future is, to me, well, you can sleep at night better. That's number one. And B, you can take action. If things are not really working out in certain areas, you can address them in time.
As a question, what is most often overlooked? What is, in people make a budget?
Most often, like I said, if you are your own independent producer, I think we tend to get excited and we overproject our revenues. We think we're going to fill the house at, 85% and not 40.
How much PR, for example, you say about like from percentages of a cost, that are you don't really have to pay, but you say in a budget it should be there.
Well, can we go back to the very simple sheet so we can look at all the various lines, things that we need to look at. Insurance is one. Some producer, if you're just beginning, having volunteer insurance in New York City required. Most of us don't think about it.
So you need it.
So you absolutely have to have it.
How much is it?
Right now?
More or less.
I haven't gotten to New York City in a very long time, I'm going to tell you. It's not a lot, but you should have it.
It's like
$500, I don't know. I'm just, can you switch to another file? What are the things? I think we talked about it a little bit. It's just you really have a lot of unknowns with how your show is going to do. Can you rely on tickets? To what extent you can rely on tickets? How much do you need to supplement it with contributions or sponsorships, depending on what your model is?
What are legal consequences if something doesn't work out with your budget? You are the producer.
That's a good question. What is a producer? Who is a producer? What's a producer role? How do I understand a producer? The way I was taught at Columbia University with Stephen Chaikelson, thank you very much, was producer is ultimately the person who takes the risk. It's the person who owns the rights, intellectual property, that's number one, and ultimately carries the risk. So whatever happens with the show, you're on the hook for it. You are the executive producer. There are different levels of producers in the commercial production, but if you are the executive producer, legal ramifications, well, not having cash in the bank account, if you have a commercial production, you've capitalized it, but if what you capitalized is not enough to open the show, that's a big problem. It can be solved. There are instruments for that, but I don't know if everybody's on that level. How about maybe you bring up some of the questions you came here with, and we'll try to maybe address them collectively.
Can we see the other budget? Is there a way, a second budget?
Okay, he left. The cameraman left. It's okay. We can go through line by line, or we can address specific issues. How about?
Yeah, maybe until it comes back, we go with our questions.
Hi. One thing that I think could be useful for the group to talk about is like how you set up your general ledger. I think I just inherited one, and it was fun and geeky for us to go through it and fix it. But I was thinking, what can people think when they're approaching their general ledger for the first time, and how can your general ledger reflect your values as an organization?
What is a general ledger? That's from me, yes.
Well, general ledger is your books. Ultimately, that's what it is. It's a detail on your books. If you're a nonprofit, in this country, we have a accounting gap, is the system that regulates how you report ultimately to the government on your results, but also how you structure financially your operations, both commercially or as a nonprofit. The general ledger is just all the details, and when you set it up, I know there's software for that. There's accounting principles. I would advise have an accountant work with you very closely when you first set it up. So you have your balance sheet, you have your income statement, you have your cash flows, you have your bank accounts set up first, right? Your credit cards, any other lines that are the kind of the principal structure for your operation, your project, your baby. Whatever the most important elements are for you, you set this up as accounts, and then you kind of break it out into categories, and then from there it can get very, very super complicated if you have a whole company or organization. And then you want to work with, also if you receive grants, you want to make sure there's a way in your general ledger to identify all the expenses by the source of the revenue, the grant. Because when later on at the end of the year, if you have to report back on those grants, each foundation will ask you to identify how did you spend my money. So it will make your life much easier from the very start. You have a structure that allows you to identify every single expense by each grant. And sometimes there are several grants supporting one expense line, right? So just have a way, there's software for that. QuickBooks do that. Intuit, I like that better. Sorry, the Sage Intact is my favorite.
So what software you suggest?
It's called Sage Intact. Sage Intact is, allows for greater level of project diversity. You can have different dimensions. They call it dimensions. So in the most basic way, you have expenses and revenue, and that's pretty much it. Dimensions is you can track things by grants, you can track things by the show, you can track things by the type of revenue it depends on, et cetera, et cetera. So that software is just, I find more helpful for a larger entity.
Thank you. How do you make accurate projections? Oh, so sorry. How do you make accurate projections, and like, what are some mistakes to avoid when making those projections?
Well, projections is knowledge, and a lot of it is educated knowledge. You know, it's experience. From years of experience, you kind of already know what to look out for, and before that, hopefully you gain that experience day to day, but you try to think about every little thing. You know, did I just buy envelopes for this mailing? Did I think about that before? Did I put that in my initial plan? No, I didn't. Well, I better add that in, right? Eventually, over years, you already kind of know what to look out for. If your ticket sales are not going quite as well, if something on the market changed so substantial that you know your investors are not quite going to provide as you first anticipated for to build your capitalized budget. And then your second question was, what are the mistakes? Again, I think it's just back to our psychology. We get excited. We underestimate our expenses and we overproject our revenues. It's the hardest thing to beat because we get excited. We love our projects, and to have someone else to look at it, or having a partner, or having another eye on things, a critical eye, is super helpful, because I think that's usually the kind of the
So you keep emotions out of the budget. We have your budget up here now, if you want to now say a few words.
Well, this is just a super basic, and these numbers are not real, I just made them up, but just to go over...
Maybe read it through from the key...
Just the most basic things in a small production would be, you start with your revenues. Earned revenues are what? Tickets, concessions, if you're nonprofit, sponsorships, considered portions of it, ticket value of sponsorship considered to be earned revenue. Then you have contributed if you're a nonprofit. You have grants, you have donations, you have net of special events, and so on. Then we go to expenses, payroll, artist fees as freelancers, production expenses such as equipment, venue rental, right? And then all the little things that you sometimes, they're not so little. Marketing and advertising, how do you estimate, good value for marketing? There's a rule of thumb used to exist, about 20% of your expenses should be marketing.
Yeah,
but
that's quite a number which no one really puts in, so say it again, it's 20%, right?
20% used to be, but again, it changes, and it just depends who you are, what you're doing, and I don't like these rules of thumbs. I think you really just need to be super specific to what you're doing. But you always have to have contingency, which I didn't put in here, and that's silly. You want to build in at least 10%, or probably, if you can, a lot more. If you are independent and don't have a large organization to fall back on, what if you run out of money? What if you run out of cash? Build a much bigger contingency. You'd never know. Put 25% in there. It just will allow you to kind of breathe a little easier as you go through.
So 25% you suggest?
At least. If it's an independent project and you don't have a bank to go back to, or an organization to kind of shift things around from one project to another.
Yeah, and I think these are really important numbers, also the 20% outreach. Also your foundations want to see. You might think, oh, no, let's save some of the money, but people who support you, give you grants, your board members, they want to see that you actually make a very serious effort in outreach.
Yes, and the things maintenance. Sometimes you pay utilities on your rental. It depends, again, what kind of agreement you have, what kind of unions do you have. There are 14 unions involved in the Broadway commercial production. Each one of them has their own rates, rules, etc. So it gets super complicated. That's why, like, it's hard to cover broadly. This is a wonderful audience of very different levels of experience, as I can tell. Yep.
Could you?
Hi, this is extremely interesting. Interested in producing, so I think for me it's very eye-opening. But I'm curious about, seeking funding. I think people from my knowledge, come to experienced producers because of their ability to make a project happen and execute, but also with the wide range of connections that they have. I'm assuming some of those connections are funders. Do you find that you have funders that are repeat, or organizations that you've built a relationship through your history of like executing, or is it changing from project to project where the funders look different?
I think our business is a relationship business, and both with investors or funders, you want these relationships to last. And when you hit hard times, or sometimes things don't go as planned, is to be in this direct and open conversation with your funders or investors, and really plan to keep these relationships ongoing. I think if you have to start from the beginning every time in your career, I mean, that's trouble. Ideally, you really want to have repeat investors or repeat funders in every case, but you got to start somewhere. So I know what to say. It depends on the project, but I think for every producer, we build these lifelong relationships. That's key. The network that we rely on and the relationships that we build ideally would last a long time.
Any other?
Yes.
In the budget, how much does the producer pay themselves, or if they're hiring a producer, what should you be looking at as to what that cost is, outside of the cost of everything else in the production?
So producers figured out this very cool thing called management fee. So when you capitalize your commercial production to kind of put it all together, let's say it's $20 million, in there, of course, you pay yourself for the work. You have to. And normally that's a kind of budget item called management fee. And that management fee continues through your actually running expenses once you open the show. But that's important. That's something that really changed from early days of producing to really trying to managing our lives and having a life and families and some sort of continuity. And I find that was pretty ingenious, that when that happened, and I feel it's necessary.
And then on a grant, you would write it out.
1 second, since it's recorded.
Like on a grant, that would just be management fee would be
If you're getting grants, you're probably nonprofit, and that probably means you're more an administrator than a commercial producer, just a different mindset. Then you get a salary normally. Or if you're getting project grant, yeah, there would be management fee because you're spending time putting it all together. So it can go either under administration or management. And grants, foundations tend to like for that number to be under 10% or around 10%, just kind of a reasonable expectation. And they also look how that compares to artist fees or artist salaries. Now we look at it a lot to make sure artists are actually compensated properly, and you want to show your foundation that your artists are your #1 priority.
Okay, 1, 2, please.
No, I was getting.
It's okay. We're just asking for an estimate for production that it's not Broadway but off Broadway. So wondering 3-4 months of work altogether with the show, what would be the number, estimate number, with the cast of, let's say, 7 people? I mean,
I think, again, even if we're talking New York City, and we're not talking Detroit, or we're not talking Art Park, Niagara Falls, it varies, right? It also varies what kind of venue. You can have a cast of 7, but the large-scale theaters are, is it a showcase, is it a Broadway production? Because expenses also largely depend on what your contract with Equity is. That kind of dictates what your scale is, and that dictates what kind of venue you can pick. So all these things are interconnected. It's hard to tell. You're looking for a showcase budget? Like I said, I haven't produced a show in New York City in about 9 years. So I'm guessing it doubled from the last time I did it. And again, it just depends what your set ambitions are, what kind of production it is. Is it more, does it have substantial video projection aspect to it, or is it plain set, or is it storytelling theater and there is no set? Anywhere between 20,000 to 800,000. It just depends what I'm sorry. It's really hard to estimate these things, but you can do things with a lot less too. I mean, it's our own ingenuity, and this city is full of people who will do things for experience or for the love of the project, and then you can do things with probably not even that. So what your relationship with the venue is? Are you paying rent? Is it free? 10,000. It's really, I've done it all. I've done it for $500. I've done it for $3 million, and anything in between. It really just depends. Yeah. Thank you.
Here.
Thank you. So my question is, what would take most priority in the sense of the budget? Would G&E tell you that they need a specific type of lighting and that goes over the budget? Would we switch things around? What's most important?
I think it's your own ambition at this scale. For example, you know that you're going to produce a showcase. Showcase with Actors Equity have certain limitations of how long you can run, what kind of venue and where you can rent. So that will most likely dictate your overall scale of your whole budget. So start there. I have a script. I have a cast of 6. I don't think I can run a commercial production just yet. I'm going to go with the showcase. Showcase, I would read through the most recent guidelines and kind of build out from there, see what the rental in New York City, rental is space is a major category, and defining kind of really probably, once you know it's a showcase and you cannot have more than 99 seats, then you know what you can rent, and then you see what deal you get, and then kind of build from there, right? And then you can also gauge what kind of tickets you can charge based on who do you have in your cast, where is the show, how well known is the venue, and what you think you realistically can charge for the tickets, and what you realistically can expect back. Right.
Any more questions? So a question for you, Sonia. I'm sure there are many or some people who are in the room or watching online. They think, should I do a production or not? It's the first one. What advice do you give? Should they do it?
Always.
Should they not? And
Always.
what are your
Always.
experiences? What do you think about it? When is a good time to start or not?
Start right now. Always do it. There are so many ways to solve a problem. Theater producing is a problem-solving art, and if you are really excited about practicing this kind of art, start anytime. I mean, I think you always should do it. And the right play, the right subject matter, if it resonates with an audience, it'll be the right thing to do one way or another.
Yeah, and I think it's important also to make mistakes and go out and do things wrong. I think we all think we want to do things right and everything is perfect and I have the grants and this, that, but actually we only learn from mistakes. So we are at the university here, there are labs in physics and chemistry and whatever. There is no failed experiment. Maybe expectations might be wrong, what you had, but it's important to go out, make mistakes. It's the only way to learn. And actually in business, people often are much more say, yeah, I fund 10 companies, one will work. It's normal. And I think we are all often afraid, I don't know this, I don't know that. The way to learn, and I'm sure a lot of you guys, of you here in the room, remember the very first thing when they produced, but they had to do the first one to get through. So we really encourage everyone to produce and to engage. I think it's what the world needs. I think this is what the city needs in small spaces. A lot of small programs. Someone once compared it to the rainworms in the earth, in the grass. They actually create the air that everything blooms. If you don't have them, you might not see them once in a while, but hopefully the flowers of theater do come out. But this is a very, very important work for a civilized city, a civilized country, and theater in all its manifestations is a fundamental contribution to the world we live in. I just got a text from Tommy Kriegsmann because of a personal matter. He cannot come, and he really apologizes, and we know Tommy, so this is he's one of the producers of the Under the Radar Festival. So maybe since the theme is at Actors' Equity Ensemble Contracts, maybe we can do a crowdsourcing here. And if someone has never done it, and I think I did a small one last year, and I had never ever done it, someone luckily helped me, but maybe someone here can speak. What is an Actors' Equity contract at all? What is an ensemble contract when you do a workshop, when you rehearse, artistic teams change? What do you have to think about? If anybody can start us up, Jeannie.
Hi. So I've worked with AEA in two different contexts. One is a company manager who disseminates Actors' Equity Association at the Public Theater and the Apollo and with Big Dance Theater, so both self-producing organizations and larger off-Broadway organizations. And then now I'm working in a regional theater in Massachusetts where we're working with a small professional theater for, like, level 4 contract. And I will say the union contracts provide, similar to a budget, a planning document for how you're going to take care of your artists when they're in this space. And that means a lot of different things depending on what type of contract you're on. It'll establish rates and hours worked for stage managers and actors. It'll tell you a lot about what you need to provide in terms of the venue and the floors and the rehearsal room and all of that. It'll also tell you how many performances you can have per week and how much you have to pay and what your health and pension needs to be. And then it's like AEA is a great resource for the artists themselves. There is a line of communication provided by the union so that there's advocacy within each company that you bring on board.
So where do you get that contract, and how does it look like?
Yeah, so when I'm working at WHAM, where I work now, in a more regional theater, I'm season planning right now, so I know what my season looks like, and I've reached out to my representative that's regional, and I said, how do I start this process? Because I'm in a new context now. I've only been working at this job for this year. And so she sent me a form, and I fill it out, letting her know kind of what the shows are, where they're playing, how many actors there are, etc. And then there's going to be a bit of a conversation and a negotiation. Depending on the tier of contract, you're going to be required to have a certain number of contracts that are union. And so sometimes that works, and sometimes that doesn't. We're a $550,000 organization, and we have to find really creative ways to negotiate with the union so that we can financially sustain ourselves. So I think in former years, we've been asked to have more contracts than we really feasibly can have, financially afford. So sometimes there's some hacks where you ask if your understudy could be on a contract, or if you need to or not need to have an ASM that's on contract, or can they be contracted differently? Can this be a reading instead of a stage play? So you start negotiating just the same way you would when you're planning your budget. And then eventually you bond your season, which means they tell you how much it's going to cost to kind of have
you send money to the bank essentially so that anything that happens that goes awry, the actors are ensured that they'll be paid to a certain degree, kind of like a safety net, I guess, and is the best way I can explain it.
I mean, that was the most thorough explanation I've ever heard of the actors union. That was sufficiently demystifying. I've worked in a very similar context to, what's your name again? Janae. My name is Charlotte. I'm a associate producer at a small professional theater in Washington, D.C. We're SPT 8. And the only things I'll add to that are that because you are essentially in contact with your regional business representative on a weekly basis, because you have to send reports if there is overtime or if there are any additional things, like if you have more performances than your tier allows, or if you are having an extra work day for the stage manager, if you have so many actors, then you have to have an equity ASM rather than a non-equity ASM. So because of that weekly relationship, it's a great kind of mile marker and a great way to think about how much a production actually costs. So when whether you're looking at equity or non-equity, going through, if you ever get your hands on an equity rule book, that can be a really great way to think of, oh, what does this production actually cost? Are the expectations of the artists going to go up when we have this level of scale, or when we're asking this much time? Yeah.
You don't need to have an equity contract. You could also do a non-equity. When do you need one and when not?
It depends on whether or not you decide to hire an equity actor, and how many.
1 actor out of 10 actors is in the union. You have to.
They would have to report any contract they take to the union. If they didn't decide to do that, that's going to be their problem down the line. It would also impact their health insurance and pension. So any actor that's in the union is going to report that to their business representative. If you're not doing an equity show, if the entire show was not bonded, they could do a guest appearance contract, but that's quite difficult.
No, same thing. You don't have to have everybody on the equity contract if you only have one, so you can have a guest artist agreement, which is possible.
Let's say the showcase contract. What are our showcase? Yeah.
Just point of clarification, right? The equity has contracts. Equity also has codes, and the showcase code is not a contract. So it's not really binding. It's just some way for equity to get you to do what they want you to do without putting you under a contract. And of course, you can always break those rules in the code, whereas you cannot break those rules in a contract. But if you do break those rules in a code, the next time you apply for the code, equity can politely decline to accept your application. But there is a difference between codes and contracts.
Tell a little bit. What about hours, days, rehearsal? If you know it by heart, how much can you do rehearsal time?
Yeah.
How long is that? How round?
Yeah. I do not know it by heart. Maybe Bruce does, but yeah. One thing I did want to say is that the Actors Equity website does have a documents library, and you can go to that site and download the contracts and codes.
If you remember, you said.
The equity Equity Showcase Code is strictly for New York City. Doesn't apply anywhere else. It mandates all kinds of fun things, like you can't pay anybody more than you pay the actors. What you pay the actors is determined by car fare, round-trip car fare per day times number of rehearsal days and performance days total. So it doesn't matter if you don't call an actor for a given set of days, you have to pay everybody for the maximum number of days. But multiplying out subway fare times 2 times number of days is less than $300 for an 8-week process. You can only rehearse up to 5 weeks, I think. You can only perform up to 3 weeks, 12 performances, or you can extend to 16 performances for 4 weeks. You cannot work an actor more than 7 days in a week. You can't do more than 1 day in a week of 2 performances. There's a whole variety of rules that are all perfectly sensible. Otherwise, you're beating your actors up, and they're not going to do as good a job because you've exhausted them. So the showcase code makes perfect sense, in my experience. I've produced a lot of showcase code shows. And the Department of Equity that responds to that email is very responsive. I've had questions and had them answer them that day when I was in a difficult situation. It's a helpful code. There are limits that I don't remember about hours of the day, but they're reasonable, they're rational. They're meant to protect the actor, and they're sensible. And it's, as you said, if you have one equity actor, then it has to be an equity showcase code, and you don't have to pay the other actors what you paid that equity actor, but we would. Our company would. We can see a world where we'd do that differently. I think that gives you as much as you need to know.
I just wanted to share for folks who are like self-producing, one thing when I was looking at actors and I wanted to work with one of my actors who recently became a union actor, is that you have to just pay attention to the media payment requirement and how you archive your work and document it through video. I find that the payments are competitive with those theaters like the Public, and like my showcase code contract for media payment was the same, which I was surprised by. But it's just things you want to account for when you're budgeting, that there's a fee and there's like a kind of a guideline for that kind of media capture. And I know that for self-producers, that's like your lifeline, is having like that documentation. So being aware of that. And then I think with our SBT4 contract, like paying attention to how we outline in our auditions, like who's local and who's not local, because that changes the requirements around housing. And I think similar to what you're saying, like ethically, you want to be asking as specific questions as possible, because I think our local is like within 70 miles, but it's in the mountains and it's dark and there's no lights. So you really don't want to not have an option for that person if it snows or something like that. So be mindful of those things when you're getting into it.
Just a quick addition to detail on the showcase code. Also, to protect actors who may be getting only $300 to do a whole show, they can quit anytime. If they get another job, they can quit in the middle of the show, they can quit in the middle of rehearsals, they need to make a living. So you have to be prepared for that. And also, because it's a showcase, it's intended to benefit them. So actors are allowed to have as many industry guests come for free as they want.
Just to piggyback on that media for the AEA showcase, we mistakenly checked off that box, and the next thing I know, we had to show a huge budget. We have 7 actors, and I think 4 of them were equity. They all had to be paid full salary for the day, which is, almost $5,000, and then any kind of other factors that would go into their pension and things like that, only to get a video for archival purposes. So that was more than I was paying all the actors combined at that point. Or, well, actually, it's not as much. And just to answer your question in terms of like putting on a production, just real estate alone will cost you about $5,000 a week. That's the going rate. That's a very cheap rate. Most of them are now going for 8. So you multiply that times 4 or 5, you've got a budget that starts with real estate at $35,000, or $30,000, however much, you can negotiate with that. And anyway, then that's.
One other important note about the showcase code, it specifies that you cannot spend more than $35,000 on your production, not counting what you pay the actors. Not counting what you pay the actors. So that it can be above that can be above the $35,000. But otherwise, maximum, that's for designs, materials, the space, the rehearsal space, insurance, everything.
Mm-hmm. For all of you who have done the codes or the agreements or contracts, is there any trick, anything important with it, what you say, I did this and that helped me, or is there anything you could share?
If you're small and your margins are really thin, it can help to guarantee your company that everyone is making a top tier offer. And so you can work within the guidelines of whatever level you're working from, whether it's a showcase code or like an actual bonded season. You can tell your actors, I can't pay you more than $900 a week, but I can assure you you're making as much as the lead in the show. And that can be a good way to make sure that your costs don't go above a certain level. And then the same thing can apply to travel, housing, making sure that it's sustainable for you and fair to them and equitable across the board.
I'm in the middle of a co-production with Central Square in Boston, and they have a little bit more regional experience with the contract that I'm on, and I found it really useful in like learning how much discretion I have to have when speaking to the union to make sure that we're saying enough so we're really aligned with what we want to provide our artists, but not so much that we get in the weeds with the union. So I just find like having a partner that you can call before you speak or write something to double check how to navigate and practice that communication can be really useful, especially if you're a young producer.
They're also very limited in what they can and cannot say to you, the union, so that they'll be transparent. No, they won't be transparent with you. They can't be because they also have a line that they need to walk. So like calling your peers, I think is essential.
Hello, I have a question. Looking back to New York, what's the equivalent of the SPT? What's kind of one tiny step above the showcase?
SPT means?
Small professional theater.
Mini.
We've got mini contract over here.
There's tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and there's mini, which is usually a step between showcase code and
The tiers are still codes, right? They're not contracts. Yeah. So I don't know. I think the LOA I thought used to be smaller than the mini, and usually it has more flexibility. Around the letter of agreement.
I think what is important, what you said before, if you have a code, if you do not obey, something goes wrong, you apply the next time, there will be consequences. So it's really important to follow that. The question as before, is it worth it? Should we say, oh no, I give it up, it's too complicated? Can one do it? What is your experience working with Actors Equity?
It's absolutely worth it. Join the Brotherhood, right? Your actors will be getting health insurance from another resource. That's tremendous. Another resource that you can give to yourself is hire an equity stage manager first, and start paying them weeks as soon as you can, because there can be a tremendous insight in schedule to make sure that you're maximizing your real estate, which, as we established, is really expensive.
And an equity stage manager also could help you run through what's allowed, what's not allowed, hours, he, she, they will know what to do.
Once they're on contract, yes.
Once they're contract, yeah. So that's also a very important to which I didn't know. So that is a very useful then tool. Anything else on, did anybody had an experience that, say this was so bad, I wish I had known before, something that happened where, which you would share? Yeah.
Just a question. Wonder if anybody else has come up against this. Recently, earlier this spring, I was invited to take part in a university production in the city, a master's thesis. And apparently, Equity is no longer issuing guests. Like, they have made that impossible? Like, to be an Equity actor in a university, in a New York City university production. And I'm just wondering if anybody knows about this and the why of it, and can it be overturned?
Yeah, if you're doing a production, this is what I was told. I'm in an MFA at Columbia, and the complexity of getting equity and the restrictions means the venue also has to be within its place, and if the seating has more seats than a 99 seat, so it complicates the contracts. And that means then there has to be representatives at the school designated just to deal with those contracts, so forth and so on. Just imagine the kind of administration behind the scenes. Now, staged readings, on the other hand, can use equity actors and can have that permission to use equity actors. So many productions will not do that so that they can have brilliant equity actors reading their script.
Yeah, oh yeah.
To those with information about the cost of having video with equity actors in rehearsal or performance, I'm thinking back to to Emily's suggestion that you have video for your PR outreach. Is it possible to get like 30 seconds of video without having to pay union rules, union wages?
Yeah, there is a limit to what you can do for social, and you do need to ask permission and give notification to your performers. And your contract. Yeah, well, we did it over email with the union.
Yeah, but the showcase code doesn't allow for that. If you have a contract.
Yeah, if we have a contract.
Can you say that?
The contracts specify how much recording you can do for marketing purposes, and the codes do not allow any of that.
Another important thing to talk about, and we don't have someone, I think, here from the Drama League, is collaboration agreements in workshops. Maybe also someone can share. If you work with a choreographer, you create works of on stage, the walk, going here, there, and you decide not to collaborate because artistically it's no longer possible. You don't have a signed agreement. That choreographer can stop any productions as my artistic work. Also, the permission to reproduce, to show it over again. It's a very complicated thing. There also, I think the Drama League puts up for workshop agreements, which one also should really, really, really think about, especially in smaller productions, so your permission doesn't depend. Does anybody has an experience or worked with that? We once hosted a workshop here, and there was a company, they could not show their work because choreographer who went out of the design process for the piece 4 years ago left, was in a bitter fight about personal breakup, and said nothing will ever be shown. So this is something they developed. They have model contracts. I think it's even on the website. So it is something very, very important for everybody developing work up and also over a longer time, that you have an agreement that if you are paid or participate, what you do in that workshop will ultimately benefit to the producer and to the goal, but it's not the right anymore of the collaborator.
That's a different union, so it's Society for Stage Directors and Choreographers, and that's...
Also actors, actually, I think, part of, because an actor claimed, I created a role. And
yes, it
my
has to do
role,
with intellectual property.
Yeah. Here, take this one.
I work with young artists, and I'm working with one right now. And I said, you really need to get a collaboration agreement because it's a lyricist, a writer, and 3 additional composers. And the thing is, when there's no money, it usually works out. But when there's even some money or a lot of money, the people who are your best friends can become real enemies. So I always say that it's best for the collaborative team, it's not a union issue, but for the collaborative team to create a collaboration agreement amongst themselves, even with regard to creative issues, like does the lead person get the final vote? Is the majority rules? Like things that you don't think are an issue can absolutely become an issue later as the piece grows and evolves.
Another contract thing. I'm collaborating with some people right now, and we had to have everybody sign NDAs, and that's another contract that is becoming more and more ubiquitous in our community. You go online and you can find templates and stuff, and so we had to have our dramaturg, our writers, and our co-directors all had to sign NDAs, which are non-disclosure agreements, so that somebody doesn't steal your intellectual property or take your idea or parts of the script and go use it in something else, and they can't go and publicize anything about the project so that the word doesn't get out about the project until you want it out.
It's quite important. I never heard that. So that's good. No, another experience? 1, 2.
Yeah, I have a question again about videotaping, either rehearsals or a performance, not necessarily for archival purposes, but for grant raising. Anybody have any thoughts about that? Because, I mean, if you have an equity cast, or at least somebody in equity, you have to pay that extra sum. But are you allowed to do that? I mean, you're not. So how do directors, any directors here, get funding via, grants without having that video?
There used to be a world without video. We're still quite well known. No, it's a small comment. There used to be a world without video. We now are stage directors. That there's different ways for stage directors to have a career. Video is a new tool, very useful, but not always necessary.
But I think up to a minute or something can be used. So last, what was it?
I just wanted to respond to that. A friend of mine did one of the last shows at the New Ohio, and he had, I think, 10 actors. A couple were equity. He had them all sign releases, and I don't know if this is because it's a tier and it's not a real contract, how well they can do it, but they all signed them. And then, of course, on the day of the shoot, one of the actors said, "I refuse to be filmed," and then it just stopped. So if one actor refuses, then it can't be done, and if they're equity.
So last.
So just...
You can come in here. There are 2 chairs.
Related to the showcase code, because Thanksgiving is this week, it reminded me that the 5 weeks that you get of rehearsal on a showcase code it's 5 calendar weeks, regardless of if there's a holiday in the middle, equity doesn't care. So just be mindful when you're producing a show and scheduling it that you account for that, because even if the actors are away with their families, those days count in the 5 weeks, and equity is not flexible about that.
So thank you, everybody. So this was a crowdsourcing. Thank you to everyone. As Sonia said, it's all about experience, and there was a lot of experience in the room. I think they're very, very important comments and things we can build on. We now go on to what we would call a case study. We thought it's also of importance to show or pick out a project where we feel it's unusual, it got done even in the gloom and doom stage. Even so, we now heard from our PR a team that more and more productions are done, that there are new companies are getting started. The wind seemed to have changed. We have with us the great Anne Hamburger, a legend of her own, Reza Abdou producer, on Garde Arts. She produced so many events, hosts in her backyard garden, showcases for young artists. I think if you ever go on the website, you see it in Brooklyn. It's a wonderful thing. And she did a piece. It was called "The Wind and the Rain," a story about Sunny's Bar. It's about a bar in Red Hook, and it was done on a boat. So, and first of all, welcome and thank you for taking the time.
I always do what Frank tells me to do. So.
It's great. Who of you knows Anne about her work?
Oh my goodness, I feel like I need to be videotaping this for social media. I'm so concerned because my marketing person said, stand up and get a picture of you with the entire audience.
Yeah.
Before I leave, can we do that?
We can do it, but I don't know if the code contract allows for the video.
I'm a non-equity performer. So
you're a non-equity producer. Okay.
Anyway.
And when it comes to producing, what do you think? What's a producer?
There isn't one definition. It's like saying what is love or what is marriage. So I think producers in the not-for-profit world are very different than producers in the commercial world. And I will talk about producers in the not-for-profit world. We only have 20 minutes, and I'd love to talk, so I'm going to have to...
30.
We do have 30? Oh, okay. But I do think, just to give you a little bit of context, I thought I'd spend 2.5 minutes summing up how we got here. So I started off as a sculptor and a performance artist, and then I realized that fine art was too lonely a profession for me, and so I moved into theater, and I started at a very young age working with Anne Bogart before her city company, and I worked as an actor until I had to do song day in an acting class, and it was one of the most horrible experiences of my life. So I decided to move onward to producing, and Anne was doing work in various sites. It was called environmental theater at that time, and I loved finding those sites. And so that made me realize, oh, this is where I belong in the world. And I applied to the Yale School of Drama in theater management, which now is very funny because if there's one thing that I'm not, it's a theater manager. So some people who are producers say they're theater managers, but I think it's a very different line of work to be a manager versus a producer. I'm a big picture thinker. I take risks. I love turning no's to yes. I think of things that have never been done before and figure out how to do them, and that's my passion. I started my theater to do site-specific work because I really feel that so much of theater, we're preaching to the choir, we're just talking to ourselves, and I felt that by getting outdoors and doing work where your proscenium is as high as the sky and you can see far and wide, and to have that be a part of the aesthetic and the content and the world was extremely exciting to me. So from 85 to 99, I did all these incredibly wild and ambitious shows like Franklin knows, closing off 4 square blocks of the meatpacking district, doing a performance called Father Was a Peculiar Man with 60 performers in a marching band, with a chandelier and a meat cleaver that hung over Little West 12th Street, with a table that went 120 feet down Little West 12th Street, where we wheeled wheelbarrows around, and there were car batteries in the wheelbarrows to power our speakers. So things like that. And I did that for 13 years. I had kids. I got burnt out. I saw New York City changing. I was like, oh, God, I need a change. And so I applied to become the artistic director of La Jolla Playhouse. I thought that if I went to La Jolla and ran a big regional theater, my world would grow. I got the job. I went there. I felt like my world shrank. I'm not a 6-play season kind of a gal. I think that's what it is. So I was there for about 6 months. I got a call from Disney out of the blue from a search firm headhunter guy who was like, Disney's looking for someone to come in and found and run a global division for theme parks and resorts. Are you interested? And I thought someone was playing a joke because like a year before I had naked men in meat lockers and women running around. But they weren't. And I went in and interviewed, even though I hate theme parks. The reason why I interviewed is because one of my mentors, who's a very important person to me, Joe Malillo, who used to run BAM, said to me, you should always go to an interview if you're asked to go to an interview because you'll learn something about yourself, even if you don't think you want this. And I was like, offered a global division, working in a corporation, never done that before, hate theme parks. Oh, well, better go on the interview. So it turns out I got the job. And then I moved my family to LA. and spent 9 years working for Disney, bringing theater artists into the theme park world all over the world. And then I started getting bored. I know it sounds odd, I'm running a global division and I'm getting bored, but I did start to get bored, because how many cruise ship shows can you do, you know what I mean? Anyway, it's true. Even though I'm proud of the work that I did, I really caused and called up a lot of change there and brought a lot of artists in who made really good money from being with us. And then Disney fired me. I love saying that publicly. They did. Because I was on the wrong side of politics, probably because I didn't keep my mouth shut enough, which that's kind of one of my downsides. Anyway, so then I came back to New York. I spent 3 years saying, I'm going to reinvent the commercial theater from the ground up. Ridiculous. Worst 3 years of my life. And then through being very depressed and quitting a lot of projects, I kind of said, I think, would everyone turn off their cell phones, please? Now, I thought, where do I belong? And I thought, I think I should relaunch my theater company, Garde Arts. And I had let the 501c3 go. You guys all know what that means. I didn't think I was ever coming back. And so then I did come back, kids and husband in tow. And I relaunched Garde Arts in 2013. And I said, okay, what's my mission now? So I'm going to talk about more esoteric things, but things that are super important, I think. Sonia's wonderful to talk about contracts. I wouldn't be good at that. Anyway, I think living a long life as a producer and an artist, like I have done, 71 now, there's a lot of confusion. There's confusion when you're starting out, but the confusion keeps resurfacing. And I don't think it's necessarily bad, because I think when one gets confused or things don't turn out exactly the way you want them to, it can be a great opportunity. You either quit because you've had it, or it can be a great opportunity for growth. So in the 80s and 90s, I made my reputation on doing site-specific theater, because I was doing stuff that nobody else could do. And when I came back, I said, well, I don't want to just do that. I want to do theater in theaters, but still have that instinct of figuring out ways to take the community and either get them into the theater or get the actors out of the theater into places where the people have never seen the work before. And so that, in spite of confusion, my whole creative life has been about doing that. But since I came back to New York, the shows that I did, many of which I'm very proud of, were really predominantly, mostly in theaters. We did a show called Fandango for Butterflies and Coyotes with this incredible group of Latin American artists, and it ended with either the audience coming on the stage and dancing with the actors in a fandango, which is a really cool form of dance called Zapata something, I'm going to screw it up. Anyway, or bringing the audience out onto the street and having them dance with the actors and also play an instrument called the jarana. And it was about undocumented immigrants coming to New York and being afraid of being deported. That was, it's unfortunately hasn't stopped being timely, as we know. But back to the wind and the rain. This is the longest answer to your question you've ever gotten. But
before you come, what's your philosophy? What's your spiritual connection? Why do you think producing is important? Lots of them, people here, some are seasoned, but others are starting out. What do you think about it as an art practice?
There's the purely creative side, and there's the more practical side, So I'll start off with the first thing that came to my mind, which is if somebody else is doing the work that you're doing, don't start a theater. Go work with them. We don't need more theaters. There's not enough money, right? Like, I think that's a very important thing to remember. Like, this business makes no sense. Being in the theater makes no sense. And I'm serious. And you only do it and keep doing it if you really don't want to do anything else. Otherwise, there is no logical reason why you would spend a life doing this. And I'm serious, too. But it's why I get up in the morning, mostly. Really. I mean, I love my kids. I love my husband. They put up with me. I say I married my husband because he's theater tolerant and he leaves me alone. That's a good quality, too, for all of you who haven't found somebody yet. Remember that, especially women. You know, the tenets of what I do are exploration and discovery and risk-taking and trying to be awake. I think one of the problems, especially with the larger institutions, like a large cruise ship, right? Like, how long does that take to turn around, right? Whereas you have a little motorboat, you can go zoom, 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 zoom. I've always purposely kept On Garde Arts to be the smaller motorboat, the little motorboat, so I could turn around. We need to stay awake to what is happening now. Many people who are running theaters have stopped, don't really do that as much as they should. First of all, running a theater with the amount of fundraising you have to do all the time can be extremely debilitating. So what keeps me going is I fall in love with an artist, and then I make a commitment to them to begin a project that starts from nothing but an idea. And that idea, just sparks go off where I'm like, this is an idea that should happen now. And then we begin to develop the project with a writer, a director, designers, a space. And we start to find our way through it. And most of the projects that, I think really all the projects that On Garde Arts develops are multi-year projects. I do not produce plays. There are people who are very good at producing plays. Playwrights Horizons, brilliant at producing plays. That's not what I do. I create ideas, and then I'm like this artistic excavator in a way. And I, together with the artists, start digging. I think another thing that I find is critical is I'm not, as a creative producer, here to tell the artist what to do, because it never works. So when I work with artists and I read scripts that are being developed, I ask questions. I talk about what I don't understand, what I think needs further clarification. But I never say to an artist, I would never say to a playwright, you need to cut work here, here, and here. Because if I was a writer, which actually I do some of that, but I'm a much better producer than I'm a writer. It's their project, it's their baby, it's their heart. I think the other thing is, I really am insistent on treating people well, and trying to build collaborative teams based on trust. With The Wind and the Rain, I had been following Sarah Ganter's work for quite a long time. And
before we go on it, let's start with that project. We are in a time where people, it's difficult to make theater. It's hard to get audience in different places. You created on the site, you will talk about it, a play. How did the idea start in the very beginning, and what was your plan for it?
Well, the way it started was Sarah Gancher, who I just heard to say is a wonderful, brilliant writer. I had been following her work, and I got together with her and said, I'd love to have you do a project with On Garde Arts. And she said, well, I've got like 3 or 4 commissions. And I said, and I love saying this to artists, what is the show you'd love to do that no one else would ever let you do? I know you can later ask questions about my mental health, but at any rate, I said that to her, and she said, you know, I've always wanted to do a site-specific project. And so we started talking about where. And first she was like Orchard Street, but the old Orchard Street, for those of you who've been in New York for some time, doesn't exist anymore, you know. So, I mean, you know, Ludlow Street, my daughter at one point moved to Ludlow Street, and I was, really? That's kind of a sketchy neighborhood. She's like, Ma, have you been down there? I'm like, no. Bar, fancy restaurant, you know, shoe store with $300 shoes. I was like, no. So she said, well, the other place I'd really like to do something is to create a story based on Sonny's bar. And I said, why? And she said, I play fiddle there, because Sarah is not only a writer, but she's also an amazing fiddle player. And she said, the story of Sonny's bar and the woman who runs it is extraordinary. So that got me really interested, like, who is this person and what happened? And Sarah started to tell me the story where Sonny owned Sonny's barn, had been in his family for 100 years. And then Hurricane Sandy came and destroyed the place. And shortly thereafter, Sonny died, but he'd married this Norwegian woman named Tuna, T-O-N-E, Tuna. And Tuna is this amazing human being who ended up getting the bar back up and running and making it a center for fiddle players and jazz, 6 nights a week. And you go to Sonny's bar, which is all the way at the end of Red Hook, and it feels like old New York. It feels like a place that there's almost no neighborhoods like that anymore. And it really feels so wonderful to be there. So we went and I visited in cobblestone streets, which I love, could see the waterfront, which I loved. And then we did a workshop in a loft space near Sonny's bar. And then we decided that actually it would be so great if we could use the barge. There's a 100-year-old historic barge that's a 3-minute walk from Sonny's.
Barge is an old wooden transport ship. Right?
Yes, yes. And we talked to the guy who runs the barge, and it all just began to unfold. And we worked on it for 2.5 years before we mounted it in October. And we were originally going to do the piece with the Vineyard Theater as co-producers. And then the Vineyard Theater ran into financial problems, and they said, well, we can't do this with you, so maybe we should postpone it for a year. And I was like, well, I'm not doing that, because On Garde Arts has a development program called Uncommon Voices, and we do 1 big show a year. And then we also have a series in my backyard. So I said, we're going to go ahead. And they said, well, okay, since we contributed to the creative development and we can help you with marketing and some other things, we'll be associate producers. But that meant I had about another $200,000 to find. And I didn't find all of it, but I found enough of it to say, we're doing this. Like when I make up my mind, I really never, like, it's very hard to talk me out of things. And I could see it and feel it and love it. And the thing that's so interesting about it, especially given what I talked to you about confusion, you know, it wasn't really confusion, but doing this show this year, it was a huge hit. We sold out we added 3 performances because people couldn't get in because we could only fit 100 people in there. And those 3 performances sold out in 6 hours. I mean, it was unreal. And it harkened back to the work I did in the 90s. And then I just said, you know, this is what I need to be doing. So we're gonna, we have a series of really exciting shows we're doing this year in 25. 2 shows that are under the radar. A wonderful show by Irina Kushelina called Space Bridge, which you should all see. She's working with 19 children. She's got an amazing visual sensibility. 11 of them are Russian refugees living in shelters. I mean, it's a beautiful, beautiful piece, only runs for a week. And then I'm working with a Russian director. The first time I met him was here, because Frank was sponsoring him. His name is Sasha Malachnikov, extraordinary visual imagination, and he's doing a workshop that we changed the new title today was Segal Variations, and now it's like Segal. Oh my God!
Segal Center?
No, Segal fucker. That's what it is. And I said, I love that title. You remember that title, right? Everybody remembers that. But before you ask me another question, let me say one more thing. Sure. I can tell you guys have been sitting here for a long time, so everybody stand up. Everybody stand up. Good. Okay, take a deep breath.
Very, very good.
You're welcome. I have pity. I understand.
So, first of all, I just want to remind us of what we just heard. Instead of someone who writes a play, not even more on the typewriter, but on the computer and brings it's getting done, she says, I like you as an artist. What is something nobody else will produce? You know how radically different that is, you know? So it's just stunning, and a lot of experience comes out of such a simple, in a way, simple way. How do you sense that's an artist I like? How do you meet them?
I look at their work. I don't just. I mean, I rarely would find an artist out of the blue who I didn't know anything about. So I go see a lot of work. Then I meet someone, and I see if we click, and I see if I like being with them, because that's like really important, because you don't want to work with somebody you don't like being with. I have either seen shows they've done in the past or might be reading some scripts. And then we start to talk about ideas. And those ideas either make me go, oh yes, this could be perfect. Or not, I don't know, but I have a pretty good emotional intelligence and instincts, and I kind of feel like somebody's either like my peeps or they're not, we're hiring a new, I have to just plug, managing producer, because I'm losing
Is it
my
an open
person.
position?
It's going to be open as of February 1st, and it's on NIFA, and will be on Playbill. But, like a couple of resumes I've gotten, I just felt like, this person doesn't have the same taste as I do. They're not my people. I mean, the only way one survives working for On Garde Arts is if one loves risk and the unknown and has a penchant for taking risks. And somebody worked for me once, said the only thing that's true about On Garde Arts is that it's constantly changing. And that's where, like 5-year plans, they're only helpful to a degree, because who knows what the world will be like in 5 years, both in a good way and in a terrifying way, right? But I don't like to focus on the terrifying, because you can do that too, and it can end up debilitating you. So when I start focusing on that stuff, basically what I say, I'm Annie Hamburger, I'm a creative producer, I know what I can do, and I gotta just do it. And hopefully that will help make the world a little bit of a better place. You know, one of the things about The Wind and the Rain, and I think the reason why it was so successful, but first of all, walking onto that barge, being by the water. I mean, we were worried that people wouldn't go out there because Red Hook is a pain in the ass to get to. There's no public transportation out there. It certainly wasn't an issue. And then we added some 9 o'clock performances, and we were like, will people come that late? And it was not, all the things we were worried about were not an issue. So, and then the boat would it wouldn't rock, but every once in a while it would go, you know. The play was beautiful. I think that was really important. It was accessible. It was funny, because I think people need funny. I mean, not exclusively. Like, I don't want you all, oh, well, I got to go off Annie Hamburger said I better write a comedy. I don't want that. But there was audience participation in a way that I felt was really terrific. Because sometimes audience participation can be like, ick. But this was done so tastefully and so wonderfully that people could leave and go, I played a part. And they were short bits, and the actors, I had amazing actors. I love these actors. And that was another thing that was invaluable. They were just top flight. Jared Mazzocchi, I don't know if you guys have heard of him, but he's a brilliant, innovative video artist, and he's a director, and now I've got him on my board, and he's just one of the greatest people to work with, and he's a wonderful storyteller and a performer. We're literally doing another project together. You know, there wasn't a bad egg in the bunch, and so that was wonderful too. So when it works like that, it's like the magic snow falls on the project somehow. The space was evocative. The play turned out great. Because one other thing I will just tell you, having spent so many years developing new work, I have never developed a new piece of work that didn't at one point feel like it was mush. That didn't at one point feel like nothing is funny. Oh my God, what am I going to do? Because when you hear something 15 times, it's not funny. And then you have to get in front of it. I mean, this is why you make theater, right? Because the circle doesn't close until the audience is there. And you stop having a certain kind of perspective about what you're doing after a while. That's why, as a creative producer, I never sit in every rehearsal. I think it's a bad idea. Because if I sit in every rehearsal, then I have no distance to what is going on. I sit in rehearsals periodically, and I also always ask the artist, like, what do you need? And I think the other really important piece of this is I try to put together people on the producing side who are smarter than I am at certain things. Like, I don't know how many of you know about John Eisner, but he ran the Lark for 22 years, and then he left the Lark, and the Lark folded, and I did a piece with him during the pandemic, which I guess we'll talk about at the 6:30. But he is the most brilliant dramaturg, I think, in the country. Playwrights love him. He knows and has worked with more playwrights, famous and otherwise, than anybody you know. He's now my creative producer in residence, and I have him work with all my writers because he's better at it than I am. And I'm happy to say that. It's not like I disassociate from it. I'm much more blunt, and I don't talk as much as John. Sorry, John. No. But I think pulling a collaborative team together of people who have strengths where you don't is another really important aspect of producing.
You already shared now some of your experience, but What are the most important things you learned in your decades?
Oh my goodness, Frank. I think I already mentioned one, which is just transitions are time for great learning opportunities. That's kind of one thing. I think the most important. I'm not sure. I'm drawing a blank. Actually, I don't know. It's
take your time.
Yeah. Yeah. As I said, I think understanding what your own personal strengths are, pulling together a collaborative team of people you trust. I'm a person who takes risks. I love taking risks. I feed off of it, not for its own sake, but just, it's exciting to me to start with nothing and then to watch the sculpture grow and morph and change and, yeah. And, somebody once said to me, well, you're such a good fundraiser. I bet you know a lot of wealthy people. And I thought that was so funny because I used to think that when I was younger, like that's the way. I don't know a lot of wealthy people. I think good fundraising is, hi David. Good fundraising is about figuring out how to share with someone what's deep in your heart and figuring out what they care about and creating a relationship based on the intersection of what's important to them and what's important to you. And remembering when you're fundraising that it's not about you. Because when people are fundraising for their own projects, it can sometimes be very scary because you're like, I'm asking for money for me. And then you have to remember you're not. You're asking for money to bring a project into the world that you think needs to be there. And you say to someone, what would it take for you to support my project? So I think really it's about relationships. And that's really what makes a strong career, relationships and respect. I've made mistakes, plenty of them. I don't stop making mistakes, but I think I make less mistakes than I did in the beginning, but I did a lot of stuff right too. And I'd say the other thing is, don't take no for an answer, There's a lot of people who think they know the right way to do things also. Listen, I went to Yale, right? Yale School of Drama. And all these schools teach you all the right ways to do things, in quotes. But when the right ways don't work, do whatever it takes, sort of like breaking the law. Because when you're inventing something, maybe it hasn't been done before. I mean, I saw that at Disney like you wouldn't believe because they have all the right ways to do things. And I was like, no, let's try doing it this way instead. Well, we've never done it that way before. And then I did it and it worked and that's, and they were like, oh, okay. So everybody has their rules, big theaters have their rules. The grants that you apply for have their rules. What is the process that you have for choosing artists? Give us the 5 things you do. And I'm like, I fall in love with artists and I work on instinct. And sometimes I haven't gotten grants because of that. They're like, oh no, instinct? Oh my goodness.
Here you go. Yeah, I mean, it's quite remarkable. And when it comes to fundraising, someone said, if you have an idea, you have a vision, you connect to something, it's your responsibility to ask. If you do have resources, if you do have money, it's your responsibility to give something. So we all have to. That is
I wouldn't tell someone who's wealthy it's their responsibility to give.
No, but
me
I
something.
think it's
I don't think that would
something
go over well.
they can do and should. Before we come to audience questions, tell us about your legendary collaboration with the great Reza Abdou and his the company. It's just the very beginning. How did you meet him? How was that very first connection? She did shut down in the meatpacking district, and the legend goes also that it was a hit. She said, "Oh, can I do one more week of shutdown?" And the city said yes. You know, the word. How did it go?
Well, before that, I do have to tell you something that popped into my mind that everybody will get a kick up. So I also worked with Irene Forness, less known about, in an empty warehouse, and I was scared to death of her when I first met her, but I ended up falling in love with her. And when I first called her up, I said, Irene, I'm interested in commissioning you to do a site-specific theater piece. And she said, South Pacific? You want me to go to the South Pacific? And I said, no, site-specific. And she said, oh, well, that's not as good, but oh, okay. So we're working in this warehouse, and I was with this guy, not my husband, who was an investment banker. And Irene was like, Andy, I really need a mattress in this scene. And we had no money, really. I had no money at the time, very little money. And so I went home and I was like, where am I going to get a mattress? And I thought, well, I have a sofa bed. I might as well just take the sofa bed apart and bring the mattress in. So I took the sofa bed apart and I took the mattress in. And this guy who I was with comes home from a long day at work in the investment bank. That one didn't work out, clearly. Anyway, and he sits down in the sofa bed, and his tush goes all the way to the floor because there was no mattress in it. He was not happy. But it's just like, okay, you need something, you figure out where to get it, which was before Reza. So Reza, I first met, I don't know if you guys know who he is or what he accomplished. It's very sad that he died of AIDS. Because, as I think you all know, there were a lot of gay men who were getting AIDS before they had medication, and it was a very tragic, difficult time. And I met Reza in California through, actually, Morgan Jeunesse and Robert Blacker. And Morgan was a very close friend of mine. I guess you all know she passed recently. And I saw, he opened a notebook and he showed me pictures of his work. And I was so blown away. I said, why don't you come to New York and we'll look around the city and we'll find a place that you'd like to do a show. And he was like, okay. And so I had this car that was, the car was very funny. Mac Wellman, who I also worked with, said, your car is the kind of car that bums shit in, which is a very Mac Wellman thing to say, for those of you who know his work. But we just drove around the city, literally. And at that time, 1990, there were a lot of empty places, storefronts, warehouses, things like that. And we drove into the meatpacking district, which now has no resemblance to what it was at the time. And Reza fell in love with the meatpacking district. Cobblestone streets and empty warehouses and carcasses hanging from these places like Long Island beef. And he just loved the meatpacking district and said, I want to do a show here. And I said, okay. And then he's like, I think I want to do a show that's an adaptation of the Brothers Karamazov. I just kept saying okay to him. You know, that was the thing. And at that time, you could do things like close off 4 square blocks of the meatpacking district, as long as it was in the evening. You can't do that today. It's impossible. I mean, our lives changed irrevocably after 9/11. I heard you talking about equity beforehand. 60 performers in a marching band with some equity actors, you know, like, can you imagine going into equity today and saying, I want to have 60 performers? Like, never happened. And I was so stunned and amazed by Ray's vision and what he could dream. I mean, we literally every day, because he dreamt it and we did it. It sounds like a car advertisement. He dreamt it. We erected a table down Little West 12th Street that was 120 feet long. And the meatpacking district at that time, there were two populations. There was the mafia, the Italian mafia, and there was transvestites who had quite the business going in the evenings. So we had to deal with the mafia and with the transvestites. You can imagine which one was much easier to deal with, the transvestites, obviously. Anyway, we wanted, you know, Reza was like, I want to put a meat cleaver and a chandelier across the street. This is an important part of my vision. So I was like, okay. And we went to this man who had an office on Little West 12th Street. I was working with a wonderful woman who started the company with me named Portia Kamens. And we walked into his office and said, well, we'd just like to attach a wire to your window so we can hang the chandelier across the street. And this guy was like, you know what I got in my pocket? And we were like, what? He's like, a gun. And if you guys don't get out of here, I know how I can use it. So we were like, okay, bye. And then we found out that the biggest business owner in the neighborhood was this guy, Jim Ortenzio at Long Island Beef. The Long Island Beef signs are still hanging up there, right? And we went to his office because he didn't answer our letter, and we knocked on his door. And I said, hi, we want to talk to you about our show. And he said, and I said, my name's Annie Hamburger, and this is Portia Kamens. And he looks at us from far in the back, and he says, Portia, the quality of mercy. And he starts quoting Shakespeare. And he thought we were cute, which was fine. And we got our chandelier hung across the street because he ran the neighborhood. And so, you know, so, I mean, the whole thing was just wild. It was insanely ambitious. Reza was like the elevated portion of the train tracks, you know, which is now the High Line. He was like, I need a red theater curtain hung from that. And we're going to have an actress jump off the train track, and it's going to look like she's hanging. And then the red curtain's going to open up, and we'll have this other 60 people or 59 people dancing a bacchanalian dance in the the parking lot. And so I was like, okay, we did everything he asked. But the reason why we could do everything he asked was I had two phenomenal designers, one of whom passed away, Kyle Chapoulis, and another of whom is still here, Brian Aldis, and they just were game to do anything. I'm not sure that exists anymore, honestly. I have to say. The game to do anything, no matter what the cost, no matter what the hours, no matter what the time, exists. And I think the reason, which makes sense, is at that time, you could live as an artist so much more cheaply. So I don't want to be one of these like asshole baby boomer creeps that says, oh, you guys, it's true, because I came to New York at a time when I could live in an apartment for $400 a month, that was in Soho or the East Village, and so when it's so much easier to live, you're much more willing to say, I'm game to do anything, than when it's much more difficult to live. So, in conclusion, because I know I told you I just run on, I think that I need to be sensitive to that, to be a good leader.
Thank you. Maybe 2 or 3 questions from the audience. 1, 2, and right here.
I'm sorry, I may not even have a question, Frank, I'm sorry. I just want to say I have 2 big regrets about my young acting career 30 years ago, and one was getting cast in Father's a Peculiar Man and taking another job instead. But a year later, I met my 2 partners, Catherine Porter, who had been in Crowbar, and Barry Rowell, who was in Father and also in Another Person is a Foreign Country. And that was when we decided to make site-based theater. And for the past 30 years, I wouldn't change a moment of it. And so never underestimate the influence that you have on people's lives and careers that you don't even know. And so thank you for that. Who was the next?
And whenever you're looking to produce things site-specifically and you're looking for a location, what sort of spaces do you find in general are more susceptible to producing live theater, and what sort of spaces do you find are least susceptible to that in the city?
I have one major comment, which is don't fight the site, it will win. So, I've seen site-specific shows that are very misguided because they're in these very echoey places and you can't hear a thing. And I made that mistake years ago doing a piece with Mac Wellman in the Natural History Museum in Washington, D.C. When you walk into a space and it's made all of marble and it has a dome ceiling, and those are so beautiful, they're the worst spaces you can use. If you find a beautiful park that you love next to a busy highway with trucks rambling and cars beeping, stay away. So I think it's not only important to look at a site for its architectural or physical beauty, but also for practical things like, can you hear? Because I also think there are people, especially since The Wind and the Rain, all of a sudden I'm getting all these people approaching me with ideas for work. And it made me stop and think, what is the kind of defining principle for me about what we do and what we did with The Wind and the Rain? And it's really about excavating a community or a neighborhood, like working with writers who are committed to a long-term process, right? And B, that you can really uncover the secrets of a community and the people that inhabit that community, and you fall in love with them. I fell in love with the woman who runs Sonny's Bar. And you're paying respect to them. The Wind and the Rain never would have happened if Sarah Gancher hadn't had a 20-year relationship with the woman who ran Sonny's Bar, because she played fiddle there every Sunday, right? So it has to do with, there are people who are like, I have this great site-specific piece, and I want to do it in a restaurant, and it's a musical about, I don't know, whatever. And I'm not interested in that, because for me, it's the whole impulse of site-specific work is about how do we get to people who don't ordinarily come to the theater? How do we use the visual nature of architecture or even the oral nature? I really think for those of you that saw The Wind and the Rain, and Brian is there, our production manager who made it all happen. You should give him a hand, because that man, but the magic of watching the play, and all of a sudden the boat goes, it just added to it somehow.
Last question.
Wow, thank you.
first of all, I love Sunny's Bar. Great place. And I was wondering what you would say to those of us who have nothing, no money, just great ideas, and some track record of producing. What do you say to those of us who are intent on creating in this environment when some people are saying, hey, they're going to shut us down, you know? And talking about this moment of this post-election moment, and I've been talking with people who run things, organizations, who've looked at me and say, hey, you know, we're really worried. What do you say to those of us who have the creative mind of moving forward?
Well, I first have to say, look, I'm as depressed as anyone else about how this election turned out. So I don't want you to think, you know, I'm not. But I also feel like there's a lot of hysteria around our lives right now about imagining the absolute worst. We do not know what is going to happen. We live in New York, and to some degree, we're a little bit protected from some of that stuff because we live in New York. I'm working with a wonderful, young, brilliant trans artist, Samora La Perdida, who I've been working with, who I first met when she sang in my backyard. And it's like, I fell in love. This is exactly what happened. And we just did a workshop at the Baryshnikov Arts Center. Will there be places we couldn't take a piece like that in the future? Maybe. But, you know, I'm a natural-born worrier. And but I try not to let that overwhelm me because we don't know what's going to happen, right? And I think the other thing I would just say is that water seeks its own level. So as a young person starting off, you can spend the majority of your time knocking on the doors of well-known people who are not paying attention to you and get really fucking depressed. I would suggest that you don't do too much of that. That if you knock on a door of somebody who's well-known, who you admire, that you try to make them your mentor and do whatever it takes to get them to know you and take you under their wing. I say that some of the mentors I had have been critical to me in my career, and I still have them. You never get too old to have a mentor. And other than that, go make a show. Go make a show. You can take the mattress out of your sofa bed and go make a show. Because none of us had any money in the beginning, you know. I mean, I was doing word processing. Do you guys know what that means? Does anybody know what that, who knows what that means? Just some people. Yeah, well, I'll show you. Yeah, it was these big computer machines, and I'd go to investment banking firms and law firms in the evenings while I was starting my theater because I wasn't making any money, and type and steal paper from their Xerox machines so I could print scripts, and then work all day on my theater. I mean, if you make shows and. You know, the thing that's great, I know I'll stop in 1 sec. The thing that's great is there are these companies that are there to support early career young artists. And find your tribe. Water seeks its own level. Find somebody, it doesn't matter if it's a dumpy, small little space. Make work, because in making work, you learn how to make work. And in knocking on doors and getting rejected, all you learn how to do is be depressed. So it's better to make work than to be depressed.
Well, this is a good work. So really great applause for Anne. This is quite a great history lesson. And thank you really for sharing. This means a lot to us. Yes, now we have to, you go here and someone can take, you will take a photo. So we all come here. for Anne, and then at 6:30 we have the next round. I think it's what I wish I had known before my first production. So, yes. Maybe you have to go back more. We need some light, maybe. No, you're good here. You're good?
Yeah. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Again?
Yeah, 2 more.
Yeah. 1. Everyone ready?
And I'll do one with you, or you?